All right, welcome everyone to our session on a taxonomy-driven model for to our session on visualization, teaching, and literacy. And so this is one of the two sessions, which are CG&A papers. IEEE CG&A is a magazine that's really trying to broaden the reach and make sure that things flow between research and practitioners. And so there are several CG&A papers. This session is all one invited special issue on visualization, teaching, and literacy. There are all of the papers in this session, plus one paper that is going to be in the next CG&A session later on. But all of our papers today are from the special issue. And so we are going to start with one of our virtual presenters. And this is a taxonomy-driven model for designing educational games in visualization with Lorenzo Amabili, Kuhu Gupta, and Renata Georgia Raidu. All right.
Visualizations nowadays surround us in print or in screen, and some of these include misleading or misrepresenting visuals. Whether this is done to mislead purposefully or whether it is a genuine mistake due to inadequate and uninformed visual design choices, erroneous data visualizations have an impact on their audiences. Visualization literacy is becoming an increasingly important topic of discussion within our community. But how can we educate the general masses about data visualization? Learning through play is used in education and psychology to describe how a child can learn about the world with the help of and also through playing. In this work, we explored the option of providing an engaging way to educate the public about visual representations through gamification. Although not as profound and intensive as taking a visualization course, an educational game on visualization is much more accessible and digestible for laymen of all ages and all backgrounds. It provides an affordable, easy, and simple way of educating the general population about basic visual representations and visual designs, about how to interpret them, and how to employ visuals in an informed way. The contribution of our work is the conceptualization of a taxonomy-driven model for designing educational games in visualization. It can be employed in various educational visualization settings, such as visualization courses or self-education activities. Our concept is based on the idea that through gamification, our audiences can learn more about the basic principles of visual design, understand better their use and meaning, and harvest their effectiveness and expressiveness, in case they would design their visualizations themselves. Our concept prioritizes the audience's edutainment, where game players learn through interactive group playing, gain new knowledge on visual representations and their design, and are rewarded for their acquired knowledge by winning the game. To specify the learning goals that should be achieved by the proposed educational game, we employ Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. This taxonomy classifies the cognitive domain in 6 different levels of objectives, which we also adopt for our game design. A principle that we explore in this work is the idea of construction versus deconstruction. By considering the visualization design process as a data-driven problem-solving task involving different variables to take into account, we propose a twofold model for designing educational games in visualization based on the idea of deconstruction and construction. Reading the model from left to right describes the process of construction, while reading the model from right to left describes deconstruction. The core of our model comprises visualization taxonomies for the data user's task categorization, the visualization variables, and the visualization vocabulary. The deconstruction part starts from a finalized visualization, drilling down to its components. In the deconstruction model, the players learn how to identify characteristics of visualization, such as recognizing that a pie chart is composed of slices that indicate quantities, to distinguish and associate characteristics to requirements, such as understanding that the slices of a pie chart are used to represent numerical proportions encoded to their arc lengths, and to infer visualization requirements, such as understanding that the pie chart is used when we want to illustrate our data as proportions of a whole. An example of our deconstruction model is the game Guess This. I'm sure that most of you played the game Guess Who when you were kids. Here we follow a similar approach. We have sliding cards depicting a visualization on the top layer and its characteristics on the bottom layer. In this bottom layer, visual hints and the chart name are presented regarding the data, users, tasks, visual variables, and visualization vocabulary involved. The dual-layer card design allows players to retrieve information on demand. Legend cards support the explainability of the encodings. The game goal is that each player must guess what visualization was given to the other players through asking questions about the visualization. The mechanism works as follows. The players ask questions to exclude bad candidates of the visualization until one of the players correctly guesses it. The construction game composes visualizations bottom-up. In the construction model, the players learn how to define visualizations, such as to describe a pie chart and its characteristics, to compare different visualizations and their characteristics, for example, to compare that a pie chart is a parts to a whole visualization, while a bar chart is a ranking visualization, and to evaluate visualization design choices, such as assessing whether a pie chart is appropriate for representing given data. An example of our construction model is the game From A to This. Players use the legend cards to build bottom-up a visualization that fulfills all the dimensions of the visual design space by picking its data, users, tasks, visual variables, and visualization vocabulary characteristics. The goal of the game is to compose the highest number of visualizations meeting the visualization requirements to win. The game mechanism is to associate visualization characteristics with specific visualization requirements to compose a visualization which the other players evaluate. In this game, learners are challenged in finding an appropriate combination of visualization characteristics matching a variety of visualization requirements. Let's look at a game course example. In Guess This, Anna picks a visualization card with a pie chart, which Beth must guess. Beth asks Anna questions such as, is your visualization representing nominal data? Or is your visualization a ranking chart? To exclude visualizations which do not match with the information collected from the Guess This board. During this process, Anna can slide the card up to receive more information about the visualization card at hand, easing the progress of the game. The legend cards are used as visual aids or legend. The more questions are asked, the number of good candidate visualizations becomes smaller, making it easier to identify the target visualization. The game ends when Beth correctly guesses that Anna picked a pie chart. In From A to This, Charlie is asked to pick a number of legend cards, so one from each color, meaning one from each design space dimension. Charlie wants to build a visualization for querying a part-to-whole within ratio data that can be used by non-expert users and that employs area as the main visual variable. Among the available sliding cards, the one that satisfies all the previous requirements is a pie chart. If Charlie identifies this as a solution to the requirements, they can verify its correctness by looking at its bottom layer. For the correctly identified visualization, Charlie gains points. This game can be played individually or with more people. In the latter case, the player with the highest amount of points wins. For our game design, we took into account the concept of constructivism, according to which knowledge is not acquired passively, but follows rather an active, contextualized learning process. We also employ the construction principle, which allows us to use the same material for a twofold game. Interaction and experience are achieved in our game through an edutainment process which follows the lines of learning by doing or playing, and also goes along with the concept of scaffolding in teaching, where players or learners can build upon the previous steps of acquired knowledge. A guided independent learning curve is sought, and each player can determine the level of knowledge they want to achieve. By peer reviewing the design choices involved over the game course, the players are required to actively participate in every game phase and to develop critical thinking about the visualization design. The cards can also serve as flashcards, which may be employed for acquiring or reinforcing knowledge about the primary representation as illustrated on the top layer of each card. Our proof of concept game can be extended to cover specific applications. It can be used in data science courses, for example, to learn about the use and the encodings of visual representations, or it can be used by graphical designers who are designing infographics for broad audiences. Our first direction for future work would be the validation with broader audiences from different backgrounds and different age groups. If you would like to play with us and help us test our game, contact us.
All right. And I'm going to encourage everyone to ask questions in the Slido, and please do feel free to add. I've got one Cedar question of my own, which is, so a question about gamification. I've seen some literature that providing extrinsic motivations, particularly money, can sometimes ironically decrease motivations compared to like the intrinsic motivation of just the thirst to learn. And what I'm wondering about is, how should we think about game-based motivations? Might they be more like the money or more like the intrinsic?
Thank you very much, Tamara, for your question. I think it's a very interesting one. So actually, throughout the design of our game, I think we never ever thought about having some kind of extrinsic motivation into the course of the game. So we always were driven by this idea of obtaining through the reward, let's say, a transformation of some kind of dull, dry learning into a more enjoyable, engaging experience, let's say. So we wanted to have something more absorbing that the players can learn through it. So I wouldn't be able to tell you explicitly about the impact of monetary rewards, but actually we saw like a little bit through some courses of game that we had that intrinsic motivation works a lot. So I could share like my 2 cents of personal experience through my courses. For example, I have seen that students find rewards, like intrinsic rewards, really motivating. So this could be just, you know, a simple, silly visualization ninja badge, for example. Yeah. So they find it, they appreciate it a lot. So I think it's a very interesting topic, and it would be really worthwhile investigating. And it's also really interesting to investigate it together with other aspects, like, for example, having collaborative plays or, let's say, having competitive plays. So our 2 games, like they fall into these 2 different categories. So it would be nice to see all these, let's say, potential design space of our game course.
Okay, thanks so much. We've got one more question on the Discord about what you found the feedback was from using in class and whether the materials are freely available online. So if there's links to those, maybe you could put those in the Discord. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So should I answer to this question or should I answer it later?
If you've got very quick answers, you could while
Yes.
our next one is setting up.
Yeah, so we are actually in the course of commercializing the product, but we will definitely provide some materials as soon as it's possible. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, and so for our next talk, we have a live one, Remote Instruction for Data Visualization Design, a report from the trenches, from Jan Ertz, Janis Peters, Yelmer Bott, Danai Kawitsaki, and Huda Lakadam.
And it works. Good afternoon. For those who don't know me, my name is Jan Aerts. I'm a guest professor at Hasselt University and Leuven University in Belgium. And in this talk, I'd like to go over our experience in teaching data visualization to a large group of students in a master, well, in 2 masters of statistics and data science, and this during the COVID-19 lockdown. Well, first of all, there are many different ways in how you can approach teaching data visualization, right? So you can focus on skills in perfecting the use of Tableau. You can provide a comprehensive and deep overview of different visual encodings for different types of data and other things. But in our course, we really want to teach them how to use visualization as a tool for thought, right? So that means that there's quite a bit of emphasis on novel visual design. So we start the course with 2 lectures on the history of data visualization, different frameworks like that by someone called Tamara Munzner, the principles of visual and interaction encoding and then examples. And then we move into pen and paper design sessions. There's 2 of those. So where we teach the students how to explore visual design space, okay? And then finally, we go into the implementation phase. That's quite a long part of the course as well, where we teach them programming those visuals with increasingly more difficult examples. But in this paper, we really focus on that visual design part, right? So to give you an idea of what we mean with custom visual designs, these are some of the images we use to give them inspiration on custom visual designs, so, and also to convey the message to the students that there's more in the world than bar charts, scatter plots, 3D pie charts, and so on. So normally we start at the top left. So we start the first design session with the warm-up phase. The idea here is that the students get acquainted with using pen and paper. So how do we do this? Well, we give them pen and paper. That's one first thing. And for example, I go over a list of 8 different objects, 8 different concepts, and they have to sketch that concept in 2 or 3 seconds, right? And this is really to make clear to them that sketching is not the same as drawing. So the thing that you put on paper is not something that is finished, it's not something that is perfect, it's just to convey an idea. Well, with those 8 different concepts, we start with things like a table, draw a table in 2 seconds, draw a chair in 2 seconds, something with legs, but we end with fear and then existentialism. Well, after the initial warm-up phase, we go into actual data sketching. In that actual data sketching, we have a prepared data set. In this case, on COVID, obviously. And then we use the diverge, emerge, converge framework to actually frame that whole exercise for those 2 sessions. That's quite a good approach to doing this. We found it comes from the game storming book, so definitely I can recommend that. In the divergent phase, in the first part, in the open phase, the students really work individually, and they get 30 minutes to put as many different ideas on paper as they can, given that particular data set. Right? In some years, we actually gave them some initial questions, but this year we didn't. Well, this particular year we didn't. At this phase, in the divergent phase, anything goes. So there's no bad sketches. Actually, you should include bad sketches as well, really to make sure that design space is captured. Right? And those, because those sketches, they can always be discarded afterwards. In the second phase, in the exploration phase, they work in small groups of 45 students, and they really explore the material that they created together. So they throw their sketches together, and they then look into, as you can see on the right here, are there different sketches that convey the same thing but in different ways? Are there sketches where one sketch is more like the overview, whereas another is detail? Can sketches be combined, for example? So for example, we have on the top right here, you could have a scatter plot of two features of the whole data set. You might have a glyph representing one particular data point, but then of course you can use that glyph instead of the different points in the scatter plot. So that's stuff that they then discuss. And then finally, in the convergent phase, students look with that's the moment that they look with a critical eye to what they've created, and they look into, okay, which of these ideas are novel, useful, and feasible. And those ideas are then the starting point for the programming exercises afterwards. But then, of course, 2020 happened. So things changed a bit. Well, first of all, the course became mandatory for all students in both masters, and those 2 masters were taught at the same time, which meant that we went from 30 students to 150 students. And then, of course, COVID-19 hit, so we had to move very fast to an online setting for that course that really heavily relied on interaction and nonverbal cues. So you can imagine the mild panic that we had at that point. So we had to switch everything in a couple of days to a completely online setting. So what are the challenges that we faced? Well, first of all, the role of the teaching assistants is really, really important in that, well, it's always really important, thank you guys, but it's really important in that design session, mainly to make the students feel comfortable. So, because some students, they would have 20 sketches, other students, they will have no sketches, or 1 sketch, because they're afraid of actually drawing wrong things. But then the teaching assistants really have to make clear that actually anything is good. Something else that, well, normally you can see which students are struggling because they don't have any sketches, but if that happens online, how do you see that? How do you make students share and discuss the sketches if they cannot sit together on the same table? And also, while going online, there's technical issues like, well, what if someone's connection drops out? We worked with different time zones going from China and Australia all the way to South America. And how do we scale everything? So for the tools we used, well, we wanted to use, we set up some requirements. First of all, students needed to be able to maintain connection to the rest of the group and to the teaching team. With that, I mean that, well, everyone's sitting behind their computer at home alone, but how do we actually break that? How do we make them part of that group with a very low threshold and actually reaching out to others? Yeah, and how do you work with hand-drawn sketches if you're online? If everyone has a tablet, okay, that might work, but how do you do this if that's not the case? And how do you support discussion of those things? And also, how do you make sure that students get the support that they need when they need it, even without us explicitly asking for it? At the same time, for the teaching team, we need to be able to actually interact with the whole group at the same time, to give announcements, for example, but also discuss things with subgroups of students without actually being a burden on the others. And again, keep an idea of how things are going. So we wanted to have a self-organizing system for this. So the tools that we used were 2 tools. One is GatherTown. That's a 2D avatar-driven communication platform. It resembles a virtual world with proximity chat. So here I have a screenshot. So we had tables of 6 people, and students could sit on one of these tables. And each table is a private space, which means you can talk to the people at that table, but you would not hear people that are not at the table, and vice versa. Each table has a number. There's also a spotlight position behind the lectern. If you go there, everyone in the room can hear you, so not just people close to you, and also including the people at the tables. TAs could join the tables to help them out, and also if someone was talking, you could see that there's a little speech bubbles that you could actually identify which tables had discussions going on and which tables were quiet. The second tool we used is Miro, I don't know how to pronounce it. I also say Miro. So while they were in GatherTown, they would also go in Miro. And we defined a very clear structure there. So Miro is an online collaboration space that you probably will know by now. So basically, at the bottom left, you can see the different columns. Each column is for one group of students, one table. Those things are numbered, and those numbers correspond to the tables in GatherTown. And students would draw at home, take pictures of every single drawing, and upload those, as in the bottom right, into Miro. for the first phase. In the second phase, where you had discussions, they would actually go into Miro together at the same table and start discussing those things. And they could only hear the people on the same table because they are in Gather Town on the same table. So what did we learn? Well, what was our experience overall? Well, actually, it was quite good. So that was confirmed in the survey that we ran afterwards with the students. And both Gather Town and Miro were appreciated for the natural interaction that they gave. So it's different from tools like Zoom, for example. But still preparing the templates was really important, and we might actually make that even more strict than it already was, right? To make things more strict, to give them more creativity. There were some students who suffered from connectivity issues, but that was not that big of a problem because they would work together afterwards anyway on the programming parts, and then if someone missed something, that would be kept up to speed by their colleagues. And at the bottom, I found that quite important as well, that we heard from the students. They told us that actually it was really good, this type of interaction, while they were in lockdown, because they had some interaction with others as well, even though they had to stay at home. And with that, I hope I was able to give you some idea of the struggles that we had in switching to an online teaching setting very quickly for visual design, and I'd welcome your questions and even more your suggestions. Thanks.
All right, one quick question. What was that book called that you recommended about the sketching design process?
It's called Game Storming. There it is. It's called Game Storming. If you go to gamestorming.com.
Storming, great,
yes.
Thank you. A question from Evgeny Polishuk. Do your students have drawing and illustrating skills? Do you think bad sketches can be demotivating for students, or vice versa? Can appealing sketches promote further involvement?
It's the echo, that's really bad.
Sorry. Do you think bad sketches could be demotivating with students who don't think that they have good drawing skills?
Good point. That's a really good point. I don't think so, because that's the role of the TAs, the teaching assistants, during that visual design session. So, and that's also what that warm-up phase, and actually, well, if they have to draw existentialism in 2 seconds, well, of course, it's not going to be good, right? I also showed the difference between a drawing of an owl and then the famous 2 circles, which also represent an owl. It's about the idea, putting the idea on paper. It should not take more than 5 seconds to make a sketch. That's something that we really try to make them clear to them.
Okay, thanks so much. There were a few further questions that we can answer in the Discord. But now we are going to move on to our next, which is one of our virtual presentations, a didactic framework for analyzing learning activities to design InfoVis courses. So let's roll the video.
Hello, my name is Elena Stoll from the University of Applied Sciences in Dresden. In this talk, I present our didactic framework for analyzing learning activities to design InfoVis courses. Data visualization literacy describes the ability to read and create data visualizations, which is becoming an important skill in the information age. To train this skill, numerous data visualization activities have been proposed in recent years. These activities involve hands-on engagement with data visualization with the goal of learning, reflecting, discussing, or designing visualizations. These highly effective tools are used to teach data visualization knowledge in a variety of contexts. However, the conscious selection of one or more of these activities for learners in comprehensive courses remains a challenge. We contribute a didactic Viz framework based on learning theory to support this process. An example of a data visualization activity is the Interface Construction Kit presented at EURES conference in 2019. Based on a predefined design space, a selected visualization can be deconstructed into several building blocks to analyze its most important aspects. To investigate a wide range of solutions for a given problem, these building blocks can be varied to construct new visualizations. The different combinations of building blocks inspire creativity and afford a quick and systematic exploration of the design space. As this example shows, viz activities can convey different data visualization competencies. Thus, they can include distinct learning activities with different learning goals, such as identifying a suitable visualization technique for a given problem, analyzing a visualization structure, creating variations by combining different building blocks, or selecting solutions. Hence, we need to classify the learning activities in a viz activity. For this purpose, we propose a learning activity template to create a concise overview of a learning activity by answering the WH questions. What describes the input, for example, worksheets or viz collections, and output of an activity, for example, a collection of sketches. Why describes the learning goal of the activity. Where refers to the learning environment, such as a classroom or remote setting. The who dimension includes the learners to whom the activity relates, such as a group of designers. When refers to the time that should be planned for this activity. And how gives a brief textual outline. In this example, we show a learning activity involving the combination of different building blocks to create different variations. Input for this activity are a worksheet with a matrix and building blocks as stickers, and output are variations of sketches. The activity can be conducted online with Mirrorboards or offline in a classroom setting. This activity is suited for students at a graduate level who work individually. It can be done in an asynchronous setting and takes approximately 40 minutes. The activity offers a systematic exploration of the design space by combining different building blocks and sketching a quick solution for each combination. Finally, the Y dimension is crucial for the didactic assessment of the learning activity. First, we adopt the cognitive process dimension of Bloom's revised learning taxonomy. In the cognitive process dimension, verbs denote the cognitive processes of learning activities. The complexity of thinking increases gradually from remember to create. For each level, we provide wording appropriate for the visualization domain to formulate learning goals. The knowledge dimension contains distinct levels of visualization knowledge. Factual knowledge refers to the basic elements of a visualization that include terminology, visual elements, or tools. Conceptual knowledge is about how visualization elements relate and about visualization classifications and principles. Procedural knowledge refers to visualization skills, such as the mastery of a visualization tool or use of an appropriate viz technique. Metacognitive knowledge is needed when assessing how a visualization is perceived, considering one's own cognition, motivations, and judgments. Learning activities are arranged in a matrix according to both the cognitive process and knowledge dimension. The matrix illustrates the extent to which the learning activities involve complex thinking and abstract knowledge. To assign a learning activity to a cell in the matrix, it is helpful to look at the Y question in the learning activity template, which determines the knowledge level. The verb used to describe the learning goal must match one of the levels in a cognitive process dimension. For example, the learning activity variation in the interface construction kit includes exploring the design space by varying the building blocks and sketching different solutions. Knowledge about the structure of the construction kit has to be applied in the cognitive process dimension. Sketching visualization variations is on the procedural knowledge level. After each learning activity is placed in the matrix, we can derive the didactic characteristics of the entire course or viz activity. Finally, as a third part of our framework, a didactic structure chart arranges learning activities chronologically along the cognitive process dimension. Let's look at the 4 learning activities we talked about before. Identifying a suitable visualization technique for the current problem can be assigned to evaluate, since the students have to judge if the visualization example fits a given context. The deconstruction task belongs to the analyze level, since the parts have to be investigated and categorized according to the construction kit. As shown before, we put the variation activity on the apply level. The learning activity selection is also on the evaluate level, since students judge which solutions fit best to the given data and task type. So why should we use the didactic structure chart? In this example, we see that the first learning activity already starts on a relatively high level of the cognitive process dimension. This means that skills from lower dimension might be needed. Hence, the activity should be extended or combined with other activities to address these foundations. The didactic structure chart reveals whether the learning activities go well together regarding their complexity. In this talk, we presented a didactic framework that assists in planning, analyzing, and adapting the didactic structure of comprehensive InfoVis courses. The framework consists of 3 parts. First, there's a template to analyze the context and learning goal of a learning activity. In our experience, creating such a template for all activities in our course led to carefully reflect the learning goals and to conceive ways of assessing whether they are achieved by the students. Second, a matrix that supports balancing the learning activities, gauge the distribution of learning goals, and to examine the focus of the course. Furthermore, missing activities, redundancies, or inconsistencies can be identified. And third, in addition to the learning activities matrix, the didactic structure chart helps to analyze the dependencies between the learning activities. It is used to check whether they follow a logical order. Analyzing our InfoVis course, an upward process is recognizable, although we also alternate between the levels. Our didactic Viz framework is a first draft for a more comprehensive didactic view on Viz activities. In the future, we intend to extend the didactic Viz framework and will apply it to other Viz activities to test the scope, flexibility, and generality. The supplemental material with our worksheet, mirror board, and example presented in this paper can be found on constructionkit.github.io. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Check, check. Thank you. Here's a question from me to get things going with the Slido. I noticed that both you and the first paper in the session are using the foundation of deconstructing versus constructing as a kind of core idea. And I'm trying to figure out if you guys agree or disagree or are neutral on the question of ordering. Which should come first, deconstructing existing or constructing new? So do you have ideas on that, and do you think they match up with the other paper?
Yes, I think we agree with the other paper. So in our opinion, deconstruction also comes first. This is also what we experienced in our Viz courses. So as deconstructing involves lower level thinking skills, and then construction is, in our opinion, on the very higher levels, like creation. And yeah, so I think we agree. Yeah. So we go along with them.
Thanks. And another question from Katie Williams. Do you see a value in starting at a high level in the framework and then restarting at lower levels? For example, show students where they're going and allow for mistakes, then build back up to that higher level.
Okay, that's very interesting. So actually, I think we didn't think about that yet. So our aim was to balance the activities in the course and to set the foundations first. But we never tried it out, but it could be worth trying it out and see if it works. So yeah, it could be a very iterative process, I think.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, and for our next speaker, we're going to have live and in person. This is Through the Looking Glass, Insights into Visualization Pedagogy through Sentiment Analysis of Peer-Reviewed Text. And that's Zachariah Beasley, Alon Friedman, and Paul Rosen.
Okay. Thank you for being here, everyone. My name is Paul Rosen, and I'm going to talk to you about some work that we've been doing over many years associated with using peer review in coursework. visualization coursework. So as we all know, course enrollments are booming, and visualization courses are not immune to that. I've seen a lot of viz courses, talked to a lot of people who have hundreds of students. And so when we have such a large course, one of the big problems we have in visualization is that providing feedback to all the projects and the interesting designs that students have becomes quite difficult. It just doesn't scale very well because so much of this is qualitative and can't be automated in any really easy way. So the way that we've been trying to address this problem for many years now is by utilizing peer review. The reason peer review works well is because it provides this multi-perspective feedback, and of course it scales well because the more students you have, the more feedback you can provide, and so it just matches up really, really well. And so this is great, but in this work, we went ahead and took it a step further and thought about how we could actually use this peer review in order to better understand what's going on within our courses. So the benefits don't really stop there. This is an opportunity to evaluate what's going on, and today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of courses, 2 courses that we evaluated over a 3-year period. And they're 2 visualization courses from very different domains. So in the paper itself, we evaluated several aspects of these courses. You can see them here. So reinforcing course content, looking at how well students were mastering concepts over the course of the semester, looking at how peer review can either help engagement or at least measure engagement of the students, looking at peer review as a metric for evaluating educational interventions, and even looking more deeply into instructor benefits. So these are going to be the things that you'll find in the paper. I'm going to talk about a subset of them in a few moments. So before I do talk about them, let me just introduce you to our courses. So the first one was called Interactive Data Visualization. It was taught once a year to computer science graduates and undergraduates, a cross-listed course. It was a course that had 8 projects. The projects were built upon one another, so peer review is utilized between each of these projects so that students could get some feedback and go right ahead and implement that feedback in their next project. We didn't use the peer review for any form of assessment. The other course was called Introduction to Visual Communication. This particular course was taught in mass communications. It was taught to only undergraduates, so a very different style of course than you get from the computer science course. This course had 14 weekly projects, and peer review in this case was used for both assessment and for reinforcing the course concepts. One commonality between these courses is that both courses used the same peer review rubric, so they were both teaching visualization things, so it turned out that we could use the same rubric. The rubric we used was one that we authored in 2017 in the Pedagogy of Visualization workshop. And this particular rubric is general. It has 5 major categories and between 2 and 10 assessment criteria within each of these major categories. And the idea is that you kind of pick and choose what's relevant to the course you're teaching or to the project you have. So it's a pretty wide umbrella that you really customize to your needs. The data that we ultimately collected for this study was over 4,500 individual reviews. We did do some individual inspection of reviews during some of our analysis, but for analyzing the whole corpus, we used several natural language processing algorithms. The main ones that we utilized were part of speech analyzer and a thing called an aspect extractor. An aspect extractor is a way of attaching sentiment to words that are aspects. So aspects are things like nouns. So like the term visualization is a noun, or in this case, the term images is a noun. And the aspect extractor will attach these sentiment-carrying words, such as colorful, to a particular noun of images. Now, in this particular case, this is an interesting case because colorful would normally be considered a positive sentiment word, but here we also have this more before the colorful, and so it's a negative sentiment that gets attached to this images aspect. Okay, so those are the technical pieces that we used in the data. So now I'm going to go back to the findings. So again, these are the findings that you'll find in the paper, and I'm going to very briefly just talk about these three because, of course, I have a limited amount of time. So the first one is looking at how well these peer reviews actually reinforce course content. And so here we can see a Sankey diagram for the aspect extractor for the interactive data visualization course. In this picture, you can see nouns in the middle, and some of the nouns that were frequently used were things like visualization, legend, data, graph, and ink, things that are common terms that you would expect in a visualization. These are modified with positive sentiment words here on the left. So some of the more commonly occurring positive sentiment words were effective, appropriate, clear, reasonable. And then we also see a smaller number of negative sentiment words associated with the course, which are associated with the reviews. Which in this case, some examples are missing, difficult, confusing, unnecessary. So things that you would also expect to be associated with some of these nouns. And so what we ultimately saw was that in our evaluation of these is that students were actually using the course terminology, because it's not shown here, but if you look at the two courses side by side, which are using very different which use the same peer review rubric, but have very different terminologies, these Sankey diagrams look extremely different. Another area that we looked at was looking at student engagement. So here we're looking at some data that comes out of the visual literacy course. In particular, we're looking at the average number of words that students were using, and we're evaluating them across what year they are in their degree program, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. So our hypothesis was that as students become more mature, they're going to use more language, they're going to be more descriptive, their reviews will be longer. And that is a trend that we saw up through the junior year. They kept building up. But then in the senior year, for whatever reason, we can all speculate, it dropped off significantly. So the engagement level there went way, way down for the senior students in this particular course. The final area that I'll mention with respect to this evaluation is looking at the results of instructional interventions. So this is again coming from the mass communications course, and it's looking at the total number of words that were used by the students in their reviews. And what you'll notice is that there are a couple of dips in this particular picture. The first dip that you see happened here in spring 2019. This was when there was a restructuring in the course, and for anyone who's ever restructured a course, it usually doesn't go that well the first time. And you can see that the next semester they corrected for it and things returned to more or less normal. The other disruption you see is, of course, from COVID-19 in spring 2020 when everything moved online. And in this particular case, you can see that things didn't get better in the fall. Which is also not that surprising. So just some general discussion points. The first one that I always like to push is that if you aren't using peer review in your courses, you should. It's a really nice way to help engage the students, one of these active learning methods. So I strongly encourage you to use it or even build your course around it like I did. Interestingly, one of the strongest benefits that we've seen of peer review for the students themselves is the process of giving peer review engages them in the content. It's not actually the reviews that they receive. In fact, quite often students don't even look at the reviews they receive, but they still get an educational benefit out of the process. And so the last thing I'll mention is that this is a really rich source of data that we are not using for anything. And I would encourage everyone out there to go and collect some of this data for themselves and use it to improve your courses, because you can learn a lot of stuff that you maybe didn't know or is maybe a little bit harder to measure otherwise. So with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
All right. First question, do you grade peer reviews, and if so, how?
So I was responsible for only one of these courses, the computer science one. We did grade them, but only on, it was loosely based upon, did you do an okay job on your peer review? So we weren't trying to really dig into them on whether they were we didn't want to dig too much into quality, but we also wanted to make sure they weren't phoning it in, so to speak.
And then another question regarding scalability. How do you know if the peer review is good or not? So you'll still have to go over everything.
Yeah, that's a valid issue. TA reviewed them to make sure that the students were doing a good job, and we did have a little bit of that grade in there. If they didn't do a good job, we would deduct a little bit of credit if it was genuinely not a good job. But that can be a real problem, that you don't know the quality of the data that you're getting back from the students who are doing the peer review. And so, in my experience, what I kind of saw was that students who were at least trying to engage in the course material would do a good job because they were hoping that they would have good reviews from their peers, right? It's sort of a community building thing, but it can be tough.
Okay. I did put one link in the Discord to an interesting system from UBC called Mechanical TA that has a bunch of game theoretic incentives and complex software support structures for exactly that problem,
Okay.
if people are curious.
Cool.
All right, then let's move on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next one is also going to be in person, two in person, back to back. And we're going to hear about visualization design sprints for online and on-campus courses, and that will be presented by Johanna Bayer. That paper is in collaboration with Yalong Yang and Hans-Peter Pfister, all from Harvard. And again, I'm going to encourage folks to put questions into Slido. Thanks so much for those you've put in so far, and also those ones that you've upvoted.
All right, can everyone hear me? Wonderful. All right, so my name is Johanna Bayer. I'm a research scientist at Harvard University. And a couple of years ago, we've overhauled how we teach our visualization classes at Harvard. And we've adopted the concept of design sprints for teaching. And that was quite successful, so today I want to talk about our experience. Design sprints are originally a guided 5-day process where people work in small teams to quickly build up and test ideas. You can almost think of it as a structured hackathon. A design sprint contains 5 distinct steps that teams work through together. And that makes them very suitable for teaching because first, design sprints are learner-centered. So a sprint uses techniques from active learning where the focus of activity shifts from the teacher to the learners. So students don't just sit and listen to a lecture, but they actually have to directly apply their newly gained knowledge. Active learning in general has been shown to engage higher order thinking tasks such as analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, which are all important skills for designing data visualizations. Second, design sprints are project-based. That means that they focus on cooperative learning where students work together in teams and learn from each other. And this is especially useful in classrooms with students of diverse academic backgrounds. So for example, in our course, only about half of the students are CS majors. The other half are from the School of Design, of Government, Education, and so on. And in addition, project work really enables learning by doing, where students can directly apply concepts they have learned in class. And third, design sprints are well-defined and time-constrained. So a design sprint contains 5 clear steps, and on the one hand, those steps map very well to visualization projects, and on the other hand, it also allows instructors to split up a big project into smaller, more manageable steps. So we've used design sprints, visualization design sprints in several different settings, from semester-long courses to 2-day workshops. And I'll give some tips on how to adjust design sprints to those different settings. But first, let's look at the 5 steps of a design sprint in more detail. So in short, a design sprint, like I said, is a process based on rapid prototyping and user testing, where teams work together to quickly generate some initial results. So in contrast to hackathons, for example, a design sprint is really well-defined and has those specific steps, and it's also time-constrained. So let's look at those 5 steps. So the first step is called map. And here it's all about mapping out the problem space, setting a goal, coming up with questions that need to be answered to achieve this goal. So in a visualization course, what we teach in class around that time is talking about data types, thinking about what is the data, who's the audience, what is the question that the visualizations want to solve or answer. In class settings, we often use sticky notes and a whiteboard, as you can see here. In online settings, we use a Miro board or simply a shared Google Doc where students can collaborate. The second step is sketch. So this is the ideation phase where participants individually come up with many different ideas and sketch them down using pen and paper. So what we do in class here is that we cover topics of introducing students to sketching, also covering Tufte's principles, visual effectiveness, and graphical integrity, anything that helps students create better sketches. We prefer sketching with pen and paper because they're fast to create and also easy to throw out. So after sketching comes the third step, that's the decide step. So here, teams work together again to reach a consensus on the best solution or the best sketches that have been created. So that means they look at all the sketches, cluster them, discuss them, and vote on the best sketches that they want to implement. In class, we cover concepts of visual perception and cognition, and if time permits, also talk about color design, Gestalt principles, because that really gives students the vocabulary to discuss the visual effectiveness of their sketches and how they could be improved. The decide phase is often very interesting to observe as students because we get very animated discussions on which sketches they want to implement. And then the fourth step is prototyping. So here teams really build prototypes of their ideas. This is typically the most time-consuming step in a design sprint. In short workshops, prototyping can be done during class time using either Tableau or just pen and paper. For longer projects, we typically use D3, and then prototyping is typically done outside of class. So what we teach in class here is that we talk about basic chart types, but we also cover storytelling, graphic design, and dashboard design, so that students are really able to create interactive storytelling websites. And after prototyping, the final step of a design sprint is testing. So the goal of this step is to collect user feedback that can be used in the next iteration of the project. So the goal in our class is to test the prototype with 2 to 5 users to collect feedback. That means that in class, we first introduce students to qualitative user evaluation methods and teach them how to perform a think aloud study. So I know that was quick, but that's basically the design sprint in a nutshell. And we found that the design sprints are quite flexible in that you as a teacher can set the difficulty, the length, and the scope of a design sprint. So what that really means is that first you can decide on the length of a design sprint. You can make it last an entire semester, or you can fit it into 2 days. And based on how much time you have and the background of your students, you can also decide how structured the design sprints should be. You can have a very guided sprint where most of the work is done in class under direct supervision and you can give students direct feedback, or you can have a more independent sprint where students work outside of class on a final project. Then you should decide on the modality of the design sprint. So we have used having students program in D3, using Tableau, or even just using pen and paper prototypes if you teach a workshop where people don't have any programming experience. And finally, you should also adjust the course or the design sprint based on whether you're teaching in person or online, and I'll talk more about that later. So, for example, we have run our design sprints as a final project in a big undergraduate class at Harvard. And here, students work on a project of their choice in the last 5 to 6 weeks of class. And we've found that letting students choose their own teams and also their own data sets works really well to motivate students. They follow the design sprint process, but most of the work is done on their own outside of class. We still have weekly submission to track their progress and to give feedback. And the final result would be a storytelling website in D3. So here on the right is actually an example of that, where this project is on the characters in the Marvel universe and how they are interconnected. So I actually want to quickly show you the initial sketches that students created for this project, where you can see a network graph of how the characters are connected and a parallel plot of character attributes. And then this was one of their final visualizations that they came up with. So they can really come up with very fun and interesting and engaging projects. Here's another project example on the topic of loneliness and how people experience loneliness. On the left, you can see some initial sketches again. On the right, the final implementation. But we've also used design sprints in other scenarios, such as in online classes and in very guided sprints. So in this example here, if you have an online class, we used a guided sprint where most of the work is done in class. So the scope of the sprint is much smaller. And here what we do is that we use Zoom breakout rooms at the end of class to split students into their teams, and each group can work in the Google Doc where everyone can upload their sketches and they can leave comments on each other's work. If it's a very short sprint, we might also use a mirror board where every group has its own area in the mirror board to collaborate on, to draw there. And for collaborating in coding, we have started to use WebStorm's Code With Me features that really allows users to collaboratively code online. Some pitfalls in online teaching, or just things to be aware of, that in-person teaching, of course, is still much more engaging than online teaching. So using a whiteboard and sticky notes is more engaging than screen sharing, and it's also easier for students. So one thing that we do is that you can see here on the top right is that we often tell students to still sketch with pen and paper and just hold up their initial sketches into the webcam. And another thing is that online students do much better with clear and written instructions that they should already get before class, because it's much more difficult for them to kind of ask clarifying questions. And generally, online collaboration just takes a little bit longer, so you should take that into consideration when scoping out the length of your design sprint. All right, so to conclude, here are our takeaways for using visualization design sprints. So first of all, students can really immediately apply what they have learned in class, for example, Tufte's principles, without having to learn, for example, D3 first for months. Second, we found that projects adhere better to design guidelines because we encourage them to use the design sprint principles we've just covered in class. However, this comes a little bit of the downside that we found we need to encourage students more to think a little bit outside the box to come up with more creative solutions. Here's actually another example of a final project where students visualized squirrel sightings in Central Park in New York City. And then finally, we found that generally student engagement is high in those design sprints, and that results in an overall better project quality. All right, thank you for listening, and make sure to check out our teaching material online.
All right, thank you very much. A first question from me, how do you handle the problem that you're asking them to design stuff long before you cover these topics in lecture? I really struggle with that in my own class.
Right, so a lot of it is that we tell them what they should roughly do, but we don't grade them harshly if they don't know concepts yet. It's actually it's almost like priming students. We first ask them to do something, and then later on we cover the details of how this is actually done, but they've already thought about or found out problems or difficulties in doing it themselves without having the knowledge that we teach them later.
Okay, so it's the struggle first to appreciate the ideas later, sort of. It's one way to think about that. Another question from Katie Williams, how well do the students share technical and design responsibilities during the prototype step, or did students self-select responsibilities towards their own strengths?
Right, so we do a couple of things. So like I mentioned before, they can choose their own project team, but at the beginning of the final projects, we talk about teamwork and how to bring up problems that they encounter during their project work with their other team members. They have to sign something that we call a team agreement, where they basically outline how they are going to communicate, when they're going to meet, how they are splitting up the work. And since they have to have a running project notebook, if you will, in there we always tell them to document what each of the team members is doing and has been done. And that really helps to keep everyone in check so that everyone feels they have to contribute to the final project. We also have a peer evaluation at the end of the project to kind of give each other feedback within the team.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, and in our final talk of the session, another one in person, we're going to have activity worksheets for teaching and learning data visualization. And this will be from Vetria Bird and Nicole Dwenger. While Vetria is setting up, I'll just remind you that there is one more paper from this CG&A special issue from Charles Perrin, and it's going to flow into the next session in this very room right after the coffee break. So it'll be super awesome. Don't miss it. But in the meantime, let's have our final paper for this session.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you activity worksheets for teaching and learning data visualization. So this was a project that one of my undergraduate students who has recently graduated and I worked on in terms of introducing data visualization to novice users. So in this talk, I will give you an introduction into the process. I'll talk about previous work. I'll describe our approach. I will discuss some users and utilizations of the worksheets and then have conclusion and future work. So the data visualization activity worksheet method for teaching and learning data visualization is introduced in this talk. The activity worksheets help novice visualizers and novice instructors learn the data visualization design process. It helps them to design coursework and to think about the curriculum as they are developing their courses in terms of teaching and introducing data visualization. The worksheets can be used for individual activities or for self-study, and they can also be used as a collection of activities to support data visualization capacity building. So in the framework of this research that we've done, data visualization capacity building is not only being able to create visualizations, but understanding all of the elements that exist in each of those stages and how those stages interact. So the worksheet approach isn't new. It has been used in several other research platforms, basically to help developers, help visualizers develop systems and to design creative interfaces. We saw this as an opportunity to develop what I'm calling adaptable worksheets for novice users and novice instructors and for discipline-specific visualization needs. So the idea is that you can have a worksheet that is adaptable to whatever the data visualization research specific needs are. That worksheet or these worksheets can be adapted depending upon what the data visualization challenge is. So our approach is to adopt several of the methods or aspects of the previous worksheet methods into our approach by developing a worksheet for each of the stages of the data visualization process. And so what I've identified is a simple design workflow, which includes acquire, parse, mine, filter and represent, critique, refine, and interact. So for each of these worksheets, it gives us an opportunity to hone in on those specific things that we feel students should know how to do and they should understand in terms of what that particular stage covers. For example, we identified in this workflow the acquire stage to be the first stage in the data visualization process. And so this is an opportunity to engage students and encourage them to learn all they can about the data at that point. This also gives the instructor an opportunity to talk about primary sources versus secondary sources. It gives the instructor the opportunity to talk about different data formats. And so what this allows you to do is to look at the different things that are on the worksheet if you are an instructor, to learn about what are the things you want to convey to your students and what do you want their takeaways to be as they are working through this worksheet. So on this slide, this is the prototype, if you will, for the worksheets. It was the paper-based type of worksheets that we had. I literally took paper worksheets to class, had thousands of them. And so it wasn't really scalable in the sense of the more students we had in the class, the more cumbersome it was to actually work through and look at that information. So then we decided to move it to an online platform, which was where we were going in the beginning. However, with COVID-19, that really helped to speed up that process because we needed to be able to engage with students and allow them the opportunity to engage with the worksheets as well. So we created several worksheets, a digital format of the paper-based worksheets in Qualtrics. So for each stage, there is a Qualtrics survey, which really mimics what you see here on the screen. All of the information that we collected in the paper-based version was now available online. So there is a link for each of the worksheets that students could fill out. And at the bottom of each worksheet, it tells them what the next stage is. So one of the things that we're hoping is that students will realize and understand is that you can be in any of these stages at any given time. Although the process is introduced in a linear fashion, it is a very non-linear process. But for novice visualizers, I find it helpful to actually provide a strict path for them so that they understand all of the elements, and then we can go back and kind of mix things up. So one of the ways to keep them engaged and so that they could have copies of their responses with the Qualtrics survey, the responses are emailed back to them. And there are two reasons for this. One, so that they can see their responses, because at some point there's a quiz, because we want to make sure that they're actually retaining the content that is being provided to them. But then also, because it's in Qualtrics, I can see their responses. And so one of the things that this approach is allowing me to do is to create what I'm calling data visualization profiles. And so I can look at their responses, I can see if they're actually understanding the concepts that have been introduced, and if there's cause for concern, those worksheets are an alarm for me. And this has actually helped in one or two cases where I've looked at the students' responses, and it was clear to me that they did not understand either one or two of the stages. I had a conversation with the student, and at that point they did say, well, yes, I wasn't clear on this particular concept. So it really does help, I think, in my experience, to see where students are and understand what they think they understand and try to help them to move forward in the process. So they complete the worksheets via Qualtrics. They get email responses of their responses in PDF, and they're able to keep these responses in preparation for in-class assignments and to utilize them for projects that we work on as well. So why do we believe that this is important? Well, the worksheets allow novice users to build up competencies. The data visualization process can be a bit overwhelming if you are new to the process. And so what I tried to do was to come up with a way that will help to guide those new visualizers through the process and also help instructors who may not have a background in data visualization, but they want to either introduce it into their coursework or they want to develop a new course in data visualization. So how do I do that? Where do you start? What type of content do you include in the class? These are questions that I typically get, and so I'm hoping that these worksheets would help to facilitate that curriculum building around hierarchical learning. And as you can see on this slide, the Bloom's taxonomy is used to help in curriculum building. I have ordered the stages in this order. However, remember, the data visualization process is a very nebulous type of process. And so again, as I stress to my students, you can be in any of these stages at any given time. One of the benefits of having the worksheets is that if I start a student or a class in, let's say, the represent stage, they can use these worksheets to see how to reverse engineer it or maybe to figure out what their next step should be. And in figuring that out, they have the worksheets as a guide to help them to understand what they should understand in that stage and what they should be able to do. So these worksheets have been utilized in several different platforms in terms of the classes that I teach. Undergraduate classes, Introduction to Data Visualization is used to learn the data visualization process. I also use these worksheets in graduate classes where students are developing research questions. And so in terms of developing research questions, we go through a series of stages from identifying topics, from topics to questions, from questions to problem statements, and then identifying data sources. So it is a natural progression from identifying data sources to actually working through the data visualization process. I've also used these worksheets in workshops for participants who are new to data visualization. And again, it helps with not being overwhelmed with the process, but knowing that there is a progressive learning path for learning and developing data visualizations. In terms of utilization, the worksheets can be used in support of in-class learning. I use them for in-class activities. Oftentimes, students may want to do a self-study or independent study with me, so these are great utilizations efforts for that. And also, if you just want to refresh your visualization skills, I found that this to be very helpful. So we do have some limitations with the current method. Although Qualtrics has been very useful, we've also run into some issues in the sense that students are able to attach the visualizations that they create to the Qualtrics survey. We've run into some issues actually retrieving that information out of the worksheet. And so we're trying to figure out a way to move away from Qualtrics. We are looking at going web-based 100% so that will enable students and others who use the worksheets to take a look and hopefully be able to utilize it. So we are looking for feedback from practitioners. So if anyone is interested in utilizing the worksheets, I do encourage you to reach out to me. And if you have any questions about the worksheets and how they can be utilized, or maybe even suggestions, I do encourage you to do that as well. So as a next step, we are moving towards building this application where we are going to do some case studies that we can provide for students as they work through the worksheets for the first time, or maybe they've already been through the worksheets and they have a new data set that they want to work on. And so this application that we're working on will have all of this information in one location that will allow them to work through the process and to refresh their skill sets if they need to.
So from Huyen Nguyen, we have thanks for the great talk. And how do you measure the success of this approach?
I heard part of that, something the success of this approach.
How do you measure the success of this approach?
How do I measure the success? So I measure the success based on the students' output that they produce. So if you recall, I'm able to look at the responses that they enter into the worksheets and to see their progression from the beginning to the end. So the first worksheet may be a little sketchy or they're not clear about what's going on, but as they move through the process, remember it is an iterative process, so they may have to go back to one of the previous stages. And so that helps me to see if in fact they understand that it's not just a linear process, but they have to go through each of the stages. And I look at their resulting output. That helps me to get a better feel for their ability to create visualizations.
Okay, one last question. For me, actually, one of my biggest challenges with in-class active learning is the timing. I find every time I do an activity, it always takes longer than I think, whether I'm using somebody else's or using my own. Does this structured method help instructors with this hard problem?
That is a good question. I run into that challenge as well because what happens is that students actually start to get it and understand it, and so there's these organic conversations that begin. So it's a difficult challenge. I think the worksheet itself, because there are pros and cons to that. The worksheet itself kind of limits the creativity in a sense because they're kind of blocked into what's on the worksheet, but it also helps you to stay confined to those elements that are on there. So on one hand, it helps, and then on another hand, it's a trade-off.
All right, thank you so much. So again, this was the last talk in our session. There will be one more from Charles Perrin at the next session. And a reminder that IEEE CG&A is a mix of curated magazine-style educational and opinion pieces, as well as a core set of peer-reviewed research articles, and these presentations are all from a special issue of the latter. So encouraging folks to both read and submit to CG&A, which has many visualization-related content, particularly the Viz Viewpoints section, which is a personal favorite of mine. Thanks so much, and have a great break.